Okay.
Okay, sir, forward.
Is everybody ready?
Yes, sir.
Let's go. Okay, all right. First of all, thank you to Professor Chung for inviting me to speak here today about a subject I can actually speak about from personal experience. For those of you who don't know, my name is James Corbett. I am from Canada. I run a website called corbettreport.com that is a very humble contribution to the alternative media sphere. So thank you very much for coming today to listen to me and everyone else. Okay, so if you don't know corbettreport.com, I started this website about 8 years and 1 month ago. And in that time, I have garnered 110,000 subscribers on YouTube, 25 million video views. I have contributed an editorial to the International Forecaster Weekly newsletter. I do video reports for Global Research TV and BoilingFrogsPost.com. I'm a member of the Tragedy and Hope research community at tragedyandhope.com and many other ventures besides. And although the website started out as something supplemental to my actual day-to-day career, which was teaching English here in Japan, that became my full-time job about 4 years ago, where I started doing just the website. So I am one of the people who have actually made alternative independent media my actual real job, my career at this point. So I think in some ways that makes my story a humble and small, but still a contribution to the story of the alternative independent media and what it is contributing to the world right now. So I like to start my story by talking about my own personal experience because, again, I think it's a good window into what alternative media actually means. So it was 2006 in Japan. It was 9 years ago now, 9 years ago. I moved into a new apartment here in Okayama, and it was just the most everyday, mundane sort of thing. I moved into a new apartment, and it came with an internet connection. And it was the first time in years that I'd had an internet connection in my apartment, because I'd never bothered to pay for one before. So it was suddenly I had access to the internet again, and in the years that I hadn't had the internet, all these new platforms were coming up, YouTube and Google Video and things like this. Google Video doesn't even exist anymore. But I was the type of person who had always been interested in politics, so of course immediately I started looking up documentaries and watching things like that, because I'm a boring person, but it was really interesting for me to discover all of this information, and information that I had never seen and never would see on the mainstream media, watching regular old documentaries back home. Just as some examples, I would say something like a documentary like The Money Masters, talking about the creation of the Federal Reserve Central Bank in the United States. Something that you never ever get taught in school, but is exceptionally important to everyday life, no matter whether you're American or anywhere else in the world. How is money created? Why is it created the way it's created? Who creates the money? These are really important questions that they never, ever, 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 ever talk about. And suddenly I was learning about it, and that was mind-blowing to me. It was mind-boggling. I was looking up things about 9/11 and all these other just things that I never even would have imagined, but here's all this information. And because it was on the internet, I could go directly to the source of the information and look it up myself. I could look up government documents and court records and all of these things directly myself. This was a phenomenal experience for me, and it was mind-blowing to the point where I had never in my life imagined I would want to start a website or start doing media of any kind. But I saw all of this information and I was just like, well, I have to do something about it. So I started my website. And so now in 8 years, I've managed to build up a pretty big audience all around the globe with literally little more. I started with just a laptop and a microphone. That's all I had, and I started a podcast. And in that time, I've built up a global audience, as I say. So we are now living in an age where an average person with average resources and a connection to the internet can reach millions of people around the world. It is incredible. It is absolutely an incredible time to be living. So if we want to start to examine what the alternative independent media actually is, I think we have to define it against what the traditional mainstream broadcast media was. And I don't think any of this will be mind-blowing to you guys who've been studying it throughout this whole course, I'm sure, but I'll give you my own interpretation of that. I think primarily this is a technological phenomenon that we're living through. The 20th century traditional mainstream broadcast media was defined by the technologies of radio and television and satellite communications that eventually made it possible for information to be transmitted anywhere in the world, pretty much, instantaneously, pretty much, right directly into your living room. It's pretty phenomenal technology. The transmission of that data had never been easier, and more people had never been more able to receive information than in that moment of human history. It was really phenomenal and revolutionary. But because television stations and radio networks and satellites are exceptionally expensive, by its very nature, the technology itself meant that only the richest, most politically connected people could own that media. And they get to own what information goes through those different sources and what information doesn't. So, fast forward to the 21st century, now we have podcasting and we have internet access and we have social media and all of these things that have really leveled the playing field so that now we have this instantaneous transmission of information, but pretty much anyone almost can access the internet and can start putting out their own content. That is a phenomenal revolution, and that technological change has caused the rise of an alternative media that would have been impossible in any other time in human history. In any other time in human history, I wouldn't be standing here talking to you today. I wouldn't be doing what I do today. I wouldn't be talking to millions of people around the world. It wouldn't even be thinkable. It wouldn't have even been something that had ever occurred to me. So I'm living the sort of revolution that's happening. Whether it's good or bad, I'm living it. So it's again, I think, primarily a technological transformation. And I think the alternative media can be defined by a couple of key terms that derive from computer analogies, I think, probably obviously, because it's, again, primarily a technological phenomenon. The first one is open source. Traditional broadcast media is closed source. What does that mean? Closed source journalism is you read the New York Times or you're watching a BBC report or something. They're telling you information, and you just have to trust. Well, they've done their research. They must have sources for this information. They must have talked to people. They must have documents or something. But you don't get to see those documents. They don't tell you specifically what they're using for their sources of information usually. Maybe if you want to challenge that, you can go through some ombudsman and they might, do some process to vet the reporting. But generally speaking, you have no access to that. But online, of course, these days, even mainstream media is getting better at it, but still not so good. You can link directly to the source of information. So with my work, I try to link as much as I can in my articles and videos to all of the source documents that I use when I create a report. So every time I say something, if there's a document to back it up, I'll link you to the document so you can go and read it yourself. That's open source. You can look at the sources, you can see where I got the information, and you can come to your own conclusions about that information. Am I doing it the right way? Am I doing it the wrong way? Are my sources good? Are my sources bad? It's up to you. It's a collaborative process in some ways of constructing the report. The second, I think, key term to understanding the alternative media revolution is peer-to-peer. And you've probably all heard about peer-to-peer networks. The idea is, instead of one central server that sends information out and takes information in and controls the entire network, in a peer-to-peer network, every single node on the network talks to any other node directly. People can communicate directly to each other. So in this case, we don't need some central publisher or some controlling body to direct and control the information in the way that you need a publishing outfit to publish, a BBC report. You need the whatever television broadcasting networks and all of that to publish that information out. In this case, people connect directly to each other through the internet. So that is a subtle change, but I think, again, a very, very important one, because it offers the promise, at any rate, of there not being an editorial gatekeeper anymore. There's no editor that can step in between you and the journalist and say, no, you cannot give that information out to the people. If a journalist, and that's a very problematic term in this, because pretty much every single person in this room is a journalist if you want to be at this point. What is a journalist? It's just someone who's publishing information. So if a journalist wants to give information out to the world, well, if you have an internet connection and access to the internet, you do it. Now, there's censorship issues and things that we would have to think about, obviously, with regard to that. But it's more or less the case. And with peer-to-peer networks, it's even more the case. So that these days, YouTube and Facebook and things, they have more and more editorial and community guidelines that censor or kind of make certain information hard to find. But that's just the contingencies of those platforms. In the internet revolution, I mean, there's new platforms coming up all the time. You can create your own platform. You can torrent. You can connect to people directly. So the idea is you can bypass the editorial gatekeepers. Again, that's exceptionally important. Now, the downsides to the alternative media revolution, are there downsides? I think, of course, there are. And one thing that people would say is information overload. Anyone can put information out onto the internet. It could be great information. It could be terrible information. It could be completely wrong information. And now we've got so many reports coming from so many different people all the time, nonstop information. How are you ever going to make sense of it? I don't see that as being the fundamental problem with this revolution, because it kind of talks down to the audience. And again, even audience, I think, is a problematic term, because I don't think there's an audience journalist division anymore. But anyway, the audience isn't stupid, and everyone has their own process for being an editor, as it were. I mean, you're looking at a report and you're deciding, is this information reliable? Why not? How do I know? You have to do that all the time. So that's the editorial process that exists today, and I think that can deal with information overload. The last thing that I would say is, I think the real problem or potential problem with alternative media is populism. There's kind of a carnival barker mentality in the alternative media. If you say it loud enough, if you're flashy and sexy and violence, then yeah, you'll get the most views on YouTube and you'll win, or something like that. And that can be a problem, obviously. But I would say, in response to that, I mean, I'm not exactly the flashiest, sexiest, wonderful person on the planet, so the fact that I've gotten any sort of popularity is some sort of argument against that. But even so, I think it's more important that the politically engaged percentage of the population, which is only ever going to be a small percentage, that's the people who I think are important in this, not just every single person. 8 million people watch this video. It's the quality of the engagement of the viewership. And now you can finally reach people anywhere, anytime, through through very, very little technological sophistication. All right, lots more to say, but obviously we're out of time. So I will, of course, answer any of your questions that you have for me. If you want to stay, as Professor Chung said, we'll do a question and answer session afterwards. But that's the whirlwind tour of CorbettReport.com. Thank you very much.